Alrighty, so we can go ahead and get started with a little bit of an introduction. Thanks, folks, already introducing themselves in the chat. Um, Climate Exchange staffers, please help me continue letting folks in from the waiting room. Um, but we can go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone, to our first ever SCPN listening session. This is a new type of event here at the State Climate Policy Network, where we're hoping to hear from you all on your policy questions, concerns, and ideas to both kind of help you connect with each other on shared issues and to help us build out our offerings to meet your real current needs around data center regulation. We can get started on the next slide with a quick bit of an introduction. So my name is Kristen Suarez, my pronouns are she, they, and I'm the State Climate Policy Network Manager here at Climate Exchange. You can learn more about the SCPN if it's your first time at this link I'm about to send in the chat, climate-exchange.org/network. On the next slide, you can see, in case it's your first time, joining us, Climate Exchange is a national organization focused on passing effective and equitable climate policy at the state level. The State Climate Policy Network, or the SCPN, is one of our main national programs for supporting state work. We are a network of over 15,000 advocates, legislators, researchers, government officials, basically all sorts of folks working in and around state level climate policy across all 50 states. If this is your first time engaging with the SCPN and you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out to me at kristen@climateexchange.org. On the next slide, you can see that a couple ways we can help support you in your work, or we can connect you to someone who can. Climate Exchange specializes in tracking and analyzing state climate policy across various mitigation sectors, as well as providing connections with experts, advocates, and other actors working on similar issues to you. We can provide example states for climate policies, state landscape analyses, and more. We also host the State Climate Policy Dashboard, which is a free tool that tracks over 60 types of enacted climate policy across all 50 states, and that is at climatepolicydashboard.org. Okay, next slide. We can get into the event today. So our main goal today, I want to start kind of just grounding ourselves again. This is a new type of event for the SCPN. But our main goal today is to discuss your questions, concerns, and ideas as they relate to the intersection of data center policies and state climate policies. With the rapid build out of data centers that we're seeing, which are resource intensive facilities in terms of energy consumption, water use, and more, we really want to make sure that state actors can protect against adverse impacts from data centers to the climate, local communities, energy affordability and reliability, all sorts of things. And that's really the scope of today's discussion, not on data centers broadly as a concept, but how advocates and policymakers can approach data center regulation for any infrastructure that's planned in their states. And yeah, we're really just hoping to listen and gather your questions, concerns, and ideas so that we can better serve your needs related to state data center and climate policy, and so that you all can connect with one another on shared issues. The agenda is on the screen on the right. We'll start with an introductory presentation from my lovely colleague, our Senior Policy and Research Associate, Jacqueline Adams, who will set the stage with a survey of state-level data center policies related to climate, energy, and environmental concerns. And then we will move to some small group discussion where I'll launch a poll to allow you all to self-select a policy topic you'd like to discuss with other peers on the call. And we'll have 10 to 15 minutes to discuss in small groups. And then we'll all come back together for the last 15 minutes or so to share out key themes and takeaways and concerns, questions, ideas, all those good things that you talked about with your peers. And a last few things to note. Firstly, participation is key. We're going to give a short introductory presentation at the beginning where you can sit and absorb, but then afterwards we're turning it on you all and really trying to facilitate discussion and really listen to your questions, concerns, and ideas. Next, while the introductory presentation will be recorded, this is being recorded right now, the rest of the event will not. We want this to be an informal discussion where folks can kind of frankly share their ideas. So we won't be recording the small groups or the larger discussion portion. Another note, please keep the discussion constructive and productive. I know there's a lot of thoughts and fears and concerns about these topics, but this is not a space to attack people voicing concerns that don't align with your own. We want to keep this conversation productive, and I trust that we all will. And then, yeah, lastly, here at the SCPN, we're always encouraging folks to make connections with each other. So feel free to share contact information, connect with folks that you see are aligned in your work, and or follow up with me after the event if you'd like to connect with someone that you saw on the call. So that's my intro. Last note before getting into our introductory policy survey from Jacqueline, I'm going to hand it over to our policy and research director, Jordan Giroux, to set the stage for us today.
Thanks, Kristen. Just a brief note to kick us off. So Climate XChange as an organization does not typically come out and endorse or disavow particular technologies or industries. We want to be a resource for policymakers and advocates in all 50 states, meaning we embrace different policy solutions for different political contexts. Data centers right now are an unavoidable topic. They are the largest driver of load growth. They are incentivized in most states already, and they're only projected to grow. So we can meet this moment with tools to mitigate their impact and maybe even catalyze some positive investments in the electric system. That said, I want to be completely clear. Climate XChange is not promoting data centers. We are exploring data center policies. We want to explore with all of you the different tools that policymakers might use to mitigate their climate impact, their grid impact, their economic impact, their other environmental impacts, so that whether you come out of this forum with a strong pro or anti data center position, we want to explore policy options that work for you. This event will hopefully be the first of a few that we might hold on state responses to data center growth. Today, we hope to provide a small lay of the land and then mostly hear from you. To guide our work going forward, we want to meet policymakers and advocates where they are, no matter where they are, because there are policy tools in our toolkit that should work for each of us. And now Jacqueline will give us a survey of what some of those tools are, grounded in our tracking of 2025 legislative sessions. Jacqueline?
Thanks, Jordan, and thank you, Kristen. And thanks everyone for joining today. You can go on to the next slide. So first, to get us started, I wanted to kind of set the stage and highlight sort of the status of data centers in the US today. The numbers on the map highlight existing data centers in each state currently in the US. So there are just over 3,700 data centers in the US currently, with the most in Virginia at 576. In addition to highlighting the number of existing data centers, this map also shows states that have existing data center incentives, already have incentives established to attract data centers to the state. And those are reflected in the light blue fill. And then finally, there are 15 states on this map that have dark blue borders, and those represent the 15 states with the highest expected data center growth through 2030. So this is a good amount of information in one map, but the main point I wanted to make here is that data centers are here to stay. Many states are already establishing incentives to attract these centers. And as Jordan mentioned, there's a lot of expected growth in the sector. So what we can do as policymakers and advocates is plan for the best way to mitigate their impact. Next slide, please. So jumping into some legislative trends from this session. So we analyzed 113 unique bills. Companion bills that were proposed in both chambers were only counted once in our analysis. But if a state proposed multiple bills with different strategies to tackle the same issue, those were counted as separate bills. But as you can see, 30 states proposed data center legislation so far in the 2025 session. And you can see this spread on the map here on this slide. States typically propose 2 unique data center bills, and Virginia, by and large, had the most proposed bills at 28, which makes sense given the current and future growth expected in that state. Next slide. So for the purposes of our analysis, we bucketed all 113 of those unique data center bills into one of these 9 issue areas. And these probably look familiar. They're the topics that we sent out as areas of interest for this event registration. Basically, these are overarching themes that we identified as common areas that states are discussing so far this session to mitigate data center impacts. Some bills, of course, are going to fit under multiple issue areas, and given differing state contexts, goals, economies, and priorities, there can be a pretty wide spectrum of strategies that states propose in their bills under each of these categories. And then one last point I want to make before I dive into the issue areas themselves. For each one, I've included a map that showcases how many bills each state is considered under that area this session. You'll also notice that a lot of the maps are going to be skewed towards Virginia because there are so many bills proposed in the state. But to kick things off, our first issue area with employment, tax, and economic justice, just to give you a little overview of this category. So data centers are typically offer pretty generous tax incentives to locate in a state, but they offer pretty negligible local employment benefits. So some of the bills we noticed in this category might change the tax strategy for data centers to maybe incentivize them to benefit the community, maybe help the state meet its clean energy goals, or perhaps directly tax data center revenues to pay for local programming or stimulate the local economy. Next slide. In grid planning and reliability, the bills that we noticed in this category were typically incentives or requirements for data centers to operate in ways that would minimize their strain on the grid and related infrastructure, or even provide grid services such as energy storage or generation, all to help maintain reliability during periods of grid strain. Next slide, please. In water use and environmental factors, so we know that data centers can pose challenges to the local environment. They require a lot of water to cool their equipment, and they can also burden local communities with increased noise or air pollution or damage natural resources, depending on where they're sited. So the types of bills in this category may make data centers measure, disclose, mitigate those burdens on surrounding communities. Bills in this category may also require zoning amendments or additional assessments to protect at-risk communities, as well as cultural resources and historic sites or other natural resources such as parks. Next slide, please. Moving into rates and affordability, we know that as data centers become sort of the leading source of load growth, they're going to spike electric demand and prices, and this could potentially impact ratepayers. This category of requirements would establish protections to ensure that data centers would pay the full cost of their added demand and any wear on transmission, and again, ensure that that isn't passed on to ratepayers. Next slide, please. Moving into our transparency issue area. So the impact the data centers might have on our energy systems or economies or the environment could be pretty unclear unless policymakers require that this information is disclosed in some way. Increased transparency is a tool that can be used to support many policies that also fit under these of the other 8 issue areas. So this could be an extra layer of accountability for centers so that they report their energy use, their water use, any grid enhancing technologies that they're working on, or a host of other requirements. Next slide. And efficiency requirements. These are requirements that data center operations meet certain energy efficiency standards. Typically, this is mechanical or electrical infrastructure elements. Next slide. Moving along to our 7th issue area, we have co-siting requirements. And these are requirements that data centers have certain generation or storage assets on site to sort of serve their own needs. This could be renewables, batteries, small modular reactors, waste heat recovery, and more. And in some cases, these assets can be used to support the grid during high demand or during emergencies. Next slide. Next is green energy procurement, and these are requirements that data centers purchase renewable power to cover some or all of their load. And this may be accomplished through a utility tariff, maybe the purchase of renewable energy credits, or through a power purchase agreement. Next slide. And finally, our last issue area is microgrids. This is more of an emerging area in the data center space. Only West Virginia has sort of debated and discussed microgrid adoption, but essentially here data centers would produce and use their own power using microgrids, which would run independently from the grid or in conjunction with it and could support critical infrastructure for neighboring communities during an emergency. Think hospitals, community centers, municipal buildings, and the like. Next slide, please. Now I want to kind of frame all of these issue areas in the context of the US as a whole and sort of look at maybe some overall trends. So this map shows the number of issue areas that each state addressed in their legislative session to date. So you can see that California, Virginia, and Maryland have introduced bills that tackle 8 of those 9 issue areas that we've identified. But the map also highlights that states are going to have differing priorities when it comes to addressing data centers and data center mitigation. Some may be very single issue focused, while others might pursue a more holistic approach to data center impact mitigation. Next slide, please. So next, I want to provide some bill examples from this session that we categorized in each of our 9 issue areas. And I'll only mention the most relevant parts of these bills. Some of them are quite expansive. You'll also note, just sort of setting the scene as I get into each of these areas, that to the right of the bill number, I've included some bolded policy levers. You can see here for Texas, that's regulation and funding allocation. I have this for every bill I'll discuss. And the point here is to emphasize the different levers that states have in their toolkit to address data center concerns. You'll also notice some of these bills encompass multiple issue areas. Not just the header on the slide. So that really shows how intertwined a lot of these data center concerns are. And then finally, one last note, I do want to emphasize here that we did not put these bills in the slides to endorse them, but the hope is that they can be used to spark discussion in the breakout rooms in a few minutes. So with that, I'll kick it off with this Texas bill under the employment tax and economic justice issue area. So this bill uses a couple different policy levers, as I discussed, and it proposes a tax on data center revenue, which would be deposited into the Texas Prosperity Payout Fund and then distributed to Texas residents. Another bill in this bucket is this Maryland bill, SB 0316, which also uses 2 policy levers, and it proposes using 75% of the sales and use tax on data centers to fund a state account that then manages their solar renewable energy credits. Next slide. So now moving into grid planning and reliability, I have 2 example bills on this slide, but I'm going to go ahead and jump to this Colorado bill. This bill offers 2 tiers of certification for data centers to sort of get at some of these grid planning and reliability concerns. So the first tier of this base certification sets requirements for data centers regarding capital investments, grid support, energy efficiency certification, water efficiency standards, implementing storage, having renewable energy criteria. And all of this, if all of these sort of steps are met, then the data center would be offered 100% sales and use tax exemption. The next layer of that is this enhancement certification, which requires the data center to meet all of the base certifications. And then on top of that requires a minimum $10 million investment in grid enhancements, as well as investments in workforce development and community benefits. And then the data center would be granted an income tax credit that is proportional to the investment that they have put into the grid. Next slide, please. And moving into water and other environmental factors, again, I'm going to jump down here to this pair of Maryland bills. So these companion bills would require an additional impact analysis on centers that may have a negative effect on the environment or public health. The state sort of requires an additional layer of reporting for communities that have been identified as at risk. and the state has authority to deny permits if the impacts on the community or the environment are deemed too large. In addition, this bill directs some fees from the permitting process into a cumulative impacts mitigation fund. Next slide. Moving on to rates and affordability, a lot of the bills under this category sort of have similar stipulations. You can see both this Georgia and the North Carolina bill utilize regulation as a policy lever, essentially prohibiting passing data center related energy costs onto ratepayers. This Georgia bill also specifies that costs from increased fuel requirements, generation, and transmission will not be included in customer rates as well, just again to protect ratepayers. Next slide. In the realm of transparency and reporting, I'll just go over this first New York bill. So this proposed bill would require data centers to report their energy and water usage, as well as any environmental impacts. Any changes that the data center might make to their environmental planning or their energy efficiency planning must also be reported. And then the state requires establishing energy efficiency goals for data centers, and those goals must be in alignment with existing state law. Next slide, please. Moving right along to efficiency requirements. So this first Texas bill to address some concerns surrounding efficiency would add energy conservation and efficiency measures to requirements for data centers to get tax exemptions in the state. The measures that they propose might include installing liquid cooling systems or using Energy Star certified servers. And in New Jersey, these two companion bills require utilities to develop and then apply a special tariff to data centers so that the costs are not passed on to customers. But in addition, that tariff would also encourage the centers to adopt more energy efficient practices, such as capturing and utilizing waste heat. Next slide. Moving on to co-siting requirements and some bill examples here, I will note that we in the future would love to see more bills in future legislative sessions that specifically require co-siting renewables at data centers. That did not seem to be explicitly mentioned in the bills that we analyzed this session, but we've pulled a few examples that sort of begin to look at this issue of co-siting. So this first bill, California's AB 1095, establishes a revolving loan program that would support data center projects that capture and convert waste heat. And then these centers would also be eligible to receive RECs. And this Virginia bill notably phases out backup generators that emit CO2, and it mandates the state to study backup generators that do not use fossil fuels and also look into more waste heat implementation. Next slide. All right, so moving now onto green energy procurement, you'll notice this New York bill I previously mentioned in the transparency slide. So in addition to the transparency requirements that I mentioned previously, this bill prevents incentives for fossil fuel power purchase agreements, and then mandates by 2040 that all energy for data centers would be sourced from renewable energy through those power purchase agreements. And then similarly, this Minnesota bill requires that data centers procure 65% of their power from renewable sources before 2030, and then 100% thereafter. Next slide, please. And then finally, moving on to our last issue area, which is microgrids. I've mentioned that microgrids have only really been discussed and legislation has only been proposed in West Virginia. So it's a pretty nascent technology. But West Virginia enacted HB 2014, and that allows data centers to produce their own power using microgrids and offers a special utility rate for microgrid customers. Next slide. So this was a lot of information, but there are a few key points that I really want to drive home with all of this. So data centers are a growing trend. Most states are already incentivizing data centers, and they're going to drive load growth, and that's projected to accelerate. And with unchecked development, data centers may jeopardize climate goals. But states have options to mitigate their impacts, Some states have taken preliminary steps to address data center impacts, and states also have different policy tools, as was highlighted in the slide, such as taxes, regulations, studies, that can address these different areas of data center impact. And currently, as I mentioned, these strategies vary widely from state to state. So, with smart policy around them, data centers could even help catalyze parts of the energy transition. And that's all I've got. Thank you all so much for listening, and I'm eager to hear what everyone discusses in the breakout rooms.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. I appreciate that sort of just introductory policy survey to kind of set the stage and spur some discussion, hopefully. And we can go to the next slide. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. If you have any questions from that presentation, I will send my email in the chat, but it's kristen@climate-exchange.org, it should say. And so please feel free to reach out with any questions around our bill tracking, any other trends, state-specific questions like that. We can't get through every single bill here today, so definitely feel free to reach out. I'm gonna